Hello, welcome to the News Tech Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Thanks for joining us today. Before we kind of deep dive into this discussion, can you tell us a bit about yourself? What do you do at Pivotal?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. My title at Pivotal is Vice President of Products, and I look after our product and corporate marketing organizations, as well as support product strategy and a number of our other go-to-market functions.
So if you look at the product landscape, I was at the VMware world as well, and VMware, Dell, it's a big, huge family, you know.
Absolutely.
It's sometimes become hard to talk about them without mentioning the other one. So one of the key focus areas was that the focus is on cloud native, hybrid, and multi-cloud. When I look at Pivotal's point of view, what is cloud native according to you? But I don't want a crude, hardcore tech jargon, marketing loaded definition.
Sure.
In very simplistic terms, what is cloud native?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to think about cloud native is in the last 10 years or so, a handful of organizations decided that the model of building and operating software was not effective. And so they sought to change things around two specific vectors. One was managing rate of change, and then managing availability. So if you look at the people that were at the forefront of what we would now consider to be the cloud native concept, they championed things like continuous delivery, so frequent releases of software, which contrasted to other organizations or the classic IT operating model, which was, change is bad. I think if you look back over the preceding 2 decades, the common IT management doctrine, ITSM or ITIL, ITIL, was really about in order to enable highest levels of availability, we're going to rate limit change. We're going to make it really difficult for you to change things. You're going to have to go to the change control board, and you're going to have to get multiple levels of approval. Entire sets of tools and industries sprang up around preventing change with good intention, right? The idea was if things aren't changing, then it's easy to keep them up and running. But the reality of the world is that change is a constant we have to deal with. And so the folks that have led this move to cloud native really started to look at the systems differently. They said, how do we enable high rates of change without sacrificing availability? And then the second thing that I think has shifted pretty significantly is an engineering model that said, hey, it's possible for me to buy highly available systems, right? We hear all the time about people, I need 5 nines. I'm going to engineer a 5 nines of availability system. And I think the historical model was I'm going to go buy very expensive hardware components that have built-in resiliency layers, and then I'll layer my software on top of that, and it drove a ton of complexity, but there was also not a lot of truth behind that, right? And in fact, those systems built assuming that component failure would never occur. When component failure did occur, because it's inevitable, recovery was much worse. And so I think the cloud native movement has said, hey, instead of assuming that we can build something that'll never break, we're going to take the opposite position, that component failure is frequent, and therefore we should optimize around mean time to recover. We should engineer systems that are tolerant of component failure, so that application functionality maybe gracefully degrades instead of complete system outage. And so as a result, you saw, this really corresponded with the move to cloud infrastructure platforms, which frankly, when they first launched, had, VMs would disappear all the time, right? So you had to build this way. One of the more popular topics in that area is actually Netflix with their Chaos Monkey and ultimately the Simian Army, where they were actually intentionally inflicting outage and downtime in their environment. So to summarize, I would say cloud native is really a shift in change frequency, this move to continuous delivery, and it's a change in thinking about design of systems for high availability from build with components that we hope never break to building with components that we assume are going to break all the time and engineering around them.
And sometimes we break them.
Exactly. We make sure that everyone's building with that assumption in mind because they know we're going to intentionally inflict breakage, maybe even more frequently than it would naturally occur.
Right. As you mentioned that in the beginning, the companies came with the mindset of things will not change.
Yeah.
To a world where containers and VM disappear.
Absolutely.
And we are even talking about stateless and function as service and serverless
That's
landscape.
Right.
So when you move from that world to this cloud native world,
Mm-hmm.
what are the new challenges that customers face?
Yeah.
Because you interact with customers.
Yeah.
And so first of all, what are the challenges that they face, and then how do you help them?
Yep.
In two ways: technology and people.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So I think there's lots of challenges. We could probably take all our time talking about the list of challenges.
We have a whole day.
Yeah. So maybe I'll try and highlight on a couple that I think are pretty common. So one is I see people assuming that they can buy a tool and adoption of the tool solves for what are often organizational challenges. So I think as a specific example, we see a lot of companies that we talk to said, oh, we tried agile software development. It didn't work for us. But when you start to unpack that and dig a little bit deeper into it, they changed their development model. They said, hey, developers, great news. We're going to move to a model where we release every 2 weeks. We're going to run 2-week feature sprints, and we'll ship that code. You guys get to move on to the next release and then ship again, and that's going to happen every 2 weeks indefinitely. But they didn't make any changes to the operations model. They didn't change their release engineering process. And so you had an ops team that was expecting to do twice a year, 4 times a year release models, now being told, hey, let's ship software every 2 weeks. That's a pretty radical change in process and philosophy, right? If you haven't figured out how to be resilient to change in terms of your release cadence, for example, that's a pretty painful thing, right? That's that Friday night at 2 a.m. Everybody's on a phone call saying, hey, how do we get this code back up and running because things are down, we got to get it back online before customers start noticing. So I think that's one of the big challenges that people have had is trying to move to a faster velocity in terms of feature delivery or new application development, but not thinking holistically across the organization. We also see this a lot with security teams, right? Huge challenge that exists today where the rate of vulnerability discovery seems to be accelerating. I mean, I think on average over the last year, we've seen about 10 high or critical CVEs a month in the Linux operating system alone. So if you're an enterprise running, a couple thousand virtual machines, like that's a large backlog of work just to keep up with patching critical and high CVEs. Particularly if your model, again, is not set up to support frequent update and change at all layers of the infrastructure. And we see this manifest in all the breaches that have occurred, right? So to take the recent one that happened at Equifax as an example, right? Well documented at this point. There was a known vulnerability in a framework, development framework. It had a known and available resolution, and it hadn't been applied. So this wasn't hackers exploiting an unknown zero-day vulnerability. This was something that was preventable, given effective patch and update cycles being available. But by no means is Equifax the only company that struggles with this. Like we see this consistently across the industry, because back to my earlier comment, they've engineered a system that they expect to never need to change. And so I think the companies that have worked with Pivotal, to move to the second part of your question, where we help them is one, with the technology and tools necessary to update not just application code. Right? I think most people are now getting comfortable with the concept, even if they're not executing the practice of continuous delivery when it comes to application code. But we're talking about doing that for the entire stack. We talk about this idea of continuously delivered platform. For example, we release Cloud Foundry every 90 days. And we actually have a relatively short support policy behind that, right? We don't have a 5-year long-term support model. Our business is built on the idea that the market's moving fast. We've got a significant engineering effort delivering new features. We want customers on the latest version taking advantage of that. And so we saw the challenge companies were having actually updating the platform and staying up to the latest releases. And so we actually took another product we built called Concourse, combined that with Pivotal Network, which is our software distribution platform, and companies are now able to completely repave environments, zero downtime to the platform, to the end user applications running on top of it in a few hours. And that means that actually gives them the ability to update not just our software, but the embedded operating system, the middleware frameworks, like Tomcat as an app server or the JVM, and their own application code. And so as a result, it completely shifts the domain around how they think about security vulnerability management. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think we do uniquely are able to help companies with is really how they think about software development as a competitive strategic advantage, right? Shifting from project-based work to really product-based work. You'll hear this a lot at the conference this week, actually, where they've completely rebuilt their developer organizations with a focus on being business aligned. They've added entirely new categories of jobs into their organizations, right? Product designers, product managers. It's no longer let's write a technical spec and ship it out to an outsourced development house and then get that software back years later. They're building a tight coupling between the business and the technology organizations, which ultimately allows them to build better products and build those better products much faster. So I would say those are the two areas where Pivotal is really uniquely helping our customers.
How different is it from the existing development processes that they have?
I would say for many of our customers, it's pretty radical change. I think, to give an extreme example, General Motors is a customer of ours. GM, if you go back in time about 5 years, really had no developers on staff at all. They were 100% outsourced. They now have, the last number I got was over 8,000 full-time employee, GM badged software developers. So they've completely changed the organization in terms of the structure. But not only did they hire a bunch of these people, but they've changed how they think about software development. It's no longer the way they think about building a car, right? The life cycle of a car development is a decade usually, from first design to that car actually being available for something you or I could go buy. Software doesn't require you to go, build a new plant or the molds that allow you to stamp out steel. Like, you don't have that physical aspect for it, so you can actually have much shorter design cycle time. And so, the approach that GM's taken has been rapid iteration. They're moving into new markets where they're attempting to innovate, and innovate is almost corresponded with failure, like high rates of failure when you're making new bets, you're taking risks. So they've shifted their mentality from software needs to look like car building to software doesn't have the same characteristics as building cars. So we can actually go fast and put lots of ideas into market, evaluate based on real customer feedback, not guessing about what's going to be successful, and then support the ones that are successful, carry them forward, invest further in them. The ones that aren't, they can retire quickly and move on to the next idea. So I think that's pretty radical change for an organization like that.
Since you mentioned cars, so let's switch the gears. Okay. And instead of talking about technology, let's talk about you quickly.
Yeah.
I know that you mentioned today you went for a run with the Marine.
Yeah.
But when you're not doing all this Pivotal stuff and cloud native stuff, what do you do in your free time?
Well, Pivotal keeps me pretty busy, but I also have 3 young children. Mm-hmm. I have 8-year-old.
So who keeps you busier, Pivotal or the 3 kids?
Oh, it's probably a coin flip. It depends on the day, to be quite honest. Sometimes I combine them. So I actually brought the kids to the conference on Sunday, and we rode the Ferris wheel here.
So I hope you don't bring your computer when you go to the parents-teacher meeting and start working.
I try not to do that. When I'm on kid time, I try and stay off my phone, off my computer.
So Pivotal is more flexible than your kids, right?
That is a good point. I totally agree with that. That's right. Yeah, no, Pivotal's been great.
So you brought your kids here?
I did.
So what are they? Are you going with them for the trips to see the DC area or what?
Well, I actually live here in DC, so they but they had never been to National Harbor, so we got to ride the Ferris wheel here at National Harbor, which they loved. It was an Alexa device, so they got to order up all the music they wanted.
Oh, I thought they were just actually driving it.
No. I don't think they give you that much control.
Okay.
But they got to play some Justin Bieber tunes, so they were excited about that. And then they got to see where Daddy works, which was fun for them. Right. So.
And when you're not with your kids and you're not, what else do you do?
Running is my pastime. So got to go on a great run today with some of my colleagues and some of our customers on the National Mall. So we saw the Jefferson Memorial, we ran around the Capitol building, World War II Memorial, Lincoln Memorial, and the Washington Monument. So all the highlights. And
you still look fresh? You're not exhausted and tired?
Oh, not at all. I love that. It was the best. It's the best way to start a day, is with a nice long run.
Not for someone like me.
We'll get you out there one day.
We'll see. Anyway, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you. This has been great.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks for watching. Listen to more episodes of The News Tech Makers at thenewstech.io/podcasts. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.